Shabbat Shalom. Earlier this week, I had the pleasure to attend the Rockies game, Rockies versus Mets, which I have to tell you, in our house, it's complicated who we root for in that experience, having grown up in New York. And in the middle of this Rockies game, there was a double play. It was actually a very beautiful double play. And then came the request for instant replay review. And the fans waited with bated breath to have someone tell them what actually happened. And even though the call was overturned, incidentally not in favor of the Rockies, people nevertheless doubted the review. Something happened, someone asked to review it, and then even though there was a review, half the stadium was not satisfied with that result. They continued to call out what they knew they saw. So this reminds us of a question that I think we all hold quite frequently, which is, who holds the truth of an encounter? What happens when you try to review it? And this concept permeates our culture. It makes us ask, what is the truth or essence of a moment? Is it the experience, or is it the reflection? Which one actually feels more true? When there is a discrepancy, when we have a record of the action that contrasts to the retelling, where does truth actually lie? So this week, we begin reading the book of Deuteronomy, the last book in the Torah. And by its very name, we are already struggling with this issue of the action and the retelling. Because the word Deuteronomy literally means second law, or rather, second telling of the law. Nothing new happens in Deuteronomy. It is a giant review session until the very end, when we finally cross over the Jordan River into our land. But everything up until that very last moment is just Moses giving the Israelites a review session of everything that's happened from the moment they left Egypt in Exodus 15 all the way through Leviticus and Numbers. Right away, we see the potential danger in this experience. Because in chapter 1 of Deuteronomy, Moses retells the story of the scouts who went to the land of Israel. And right away, Moses' version of the story is not the same as the version that we read in the book of Numbers. We just read it not so many weeks ago. And right away, we have Moses telling a slightly different version. In the first story, it is God who says, "Go out and scout the land." In the second story, Moses says that the people requested that we go out and scout the land. In the first story, famously, the scouts come back and 10 of them are freaking out about the land. There are giants there. We cannot possibly go there. And they even bring back the famous picture of the giant grapes, of two people holding this giant set of grapes, as if each grape was the size of someone's head. But in the second story, Moses says, everyone came back with a positive report, all the scouts. And in the first story, it is because of the negative report of the scouts that the people, the rest of the people who have just heard this terribly frightening version of what their land is going to look like, yell and scream and doubt and decide that they aren't going. But in the second version, when Moses says what is about to happen in our Torah portion this week, Moses says, even though the report was totally positive, you people nevertheless decided you didn't want to go. You revolted against God. You were insolent and angry and afraid, and you didn't have faith. Now, we look at this retelling, and even our early commentators were bothered because Torah is supposedly an anchor of truth. How could it be that our Torah portion this week offers such a different account of what we literally have written down just a few chapters ago? And so at this moment, you have to start to wonder and look at who is telling the story. And as we know from so much life experience, perspective matters. Narrator matters. How many of us have heard a friend or sometimes a partner or maybe even a spouse tell a story about a moment that we shared together and think in your brain, that's not the way I remember it? We know that distance changes our recollection. And when we share a story again in the future, the essence of what we are retelling can change. Sometimes consciously and sometimes subconsciously. So who's telling the story? Moses is telling the story. And Moses has an agenda. Some commentators believe that Moses is changing the story on purpose, trying to make this story a lesson or a warning for the people. The people are standing on the edge of the Jordan River. They are about to go into the land of Israel. Moses isn't going with them. We'll come back to that in a second. And Moses says to them, look at how powerful you are. Look what you did. You were so scared that God decided not to take you directly there, but rather have you wander for 40 years. It is your fault, people of Israel, that you stayed in the desert for as long as you did. You changed the course of history. Be careful. It's almost as if Moses is saying, be careful when you enter this land of your own power. Now, some believe that Moses is changing the story subconsciously and reading his own emotions into this moment, projecting his own frustration, his own bereavement onto the people. Now, why do we imagine that Moses might be warping this narrative in his own image? Let's remember where he is. He is about to let this people go into a land that he will never see. After leading them for so long, after not even wanting to lead them in the first place, after standing up to God on behalf of the people over and over and over again. And there's a very telling line at the end of this retelling of the story where Moses says to the people of Israel, Gam bi hitanaf Adonai biglachem lemor, gam ata lo tavo sham. Moses says, it is because of you, people of Israel, that God was incensed with me too, saying, you shall not enter into the land either. Moses completely rewrites the story of why he doesn't get to go. He is angry and sad and needs to justify to himself some measure of self-worth, and therefore projects a frustration out onto the people that sounds like it could be part of the story, maybe even sounds like it should be part of the story, but that actually isn't the original story. So where does this leave us? This notion of truth and retelling. I think the Torah is reminding us, even challenging us to investigate telling, investigate stories. If even Moses, the great Moses, our leader, our teacher, the singular Moses, who no one can compare to, if even he can fall victim to desire for reframing or truth bending, then surely we have to be careful of our own tellings, and surely we have to be circumspect about the other people constantly telling us stories in our lives. This week in particular, I have become extraordinarily cognizant that we are heading into election season in the United States. And as you know, the storytelling has already started in all directions. From every side, what has the last 4 years been like? What has the last 8 years been like? What is the upshot? What is the supposed irrefutable truth of our country for the last number of years? And how does that story demand that we think or vote in a particular way? Our portion reminds us that this week in particular, and that especially at crucial moments, we must be careful to assume that retelling is objective. Surely we know that any and all candidates vying for our attention are likely both consciously and subconsciously bending the arc of truth to their benefit. We must seek our own truth, our own understanding, to find the space in between the telling and our own memory, and not cede understanding to convenient story. We must bring ourselves actually into the moment and trust that we have the wisdom and we have the discernment to find the truth for ourselves. Shabbat shalom.